I've dedicated much of my life to the restoration of harmony between humanity, nature, and the environment.
They made it impossible because of the environmentalists, the horrible environmentalists that hurt that country so badly.
King Charles III is scheduled to visit the United States on a state visit. There is a debate in Britain about whether that visit should go ahead at all. Given the current state of the relationship between the two countries, the tariffs, the trade tensions, the Commonwealth pressure, the broader pattern of this American administration's conduct, some voices are asking whether a state visit is appropriate, whether it sends the right signal, whether the king should be seen to legitimise an administration whose values appear in a number of significant aspects to be at odds with his own. This video is going to make a clear argument. The king should go. Not despite the difficulties, but because of them. And the reasons for that conclusion tell us something important about what royal diplomacy is for, what British interests actually require in this moment, and what the history of the crown can teach us about navigating relationships with powerful and difficult people. But first we need to be honest about the difficulties, because the argument for going is only persuasive if you have genuinely acknowledged what going involves. So first we're going to talk about the difficulties, what the king knows. King Charles is not a naive man. He has been in public life for more than 50 years. He has met virtually every significant world leader of his era. He has navigated the transition from heir to monarch through a period of extraordinary complexity. He knows better than most what it means to deal with people whose values differ substantially from your own. That is part of the job description. It has always been part of the job description. But the list of specific tensions between this king and this president is worth laying out clearly, because the diplomatic challenge is real and should be acknowledged honestly. So, in terms of the Commonwealth, King Charles is the head of the Commonwealth, an organisation of 56 nations with a combined population of 2.7 billion people. Canada is a Commonwealth realm, Australia is a Commonwealth realm, so is New Zealand. The President of the United States has described Canada as though it were an economic adversary and floated the idea of it becoming the 51st state. He has applied tariffs to all allied nations, including the UK, with a bluntness that treats long-standing alliances as commercial transactions to be renegotiated from strength. The king, as head of the organisation that includes many of the countries most directly affected by this approach, is not personally neutral on the matter.
We are nature ourselves. We are a part of it, not apart from it.
Next, the environment. King Charles has spent decades as one of the most prominent advocates for the environmental action of any public figure in the world. This is not a recent or casual position. It has defined his public identity across 50 years. Long before it became mainstream, and has continued into his reign. The current American administration has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, rolled back domestic environmental regulation, and treated climate change as a matter of political rather than scientific consensus. The king and the president do not share a view of what the planet requires of its leaders. Next, the tariffs and trade. The United Kingdom's economy is significantly exposed to American trade policy. The tariffs applied to British goods are a direct economic harm to British workers and British businesses. The administration's approach to trade has been characterised by leverage rather than partnership, and the relationship is framed from the American side as a negotiation in which the stronger party sets the terms. A state visit does not resolve this, it does not pretend to resolve it, but it is the context in which the visit is happening. Next, Prince Harry. This is the most personal dimension. Prince Harry is the king's son. The president has made comments suggesting Harry should be deported and has indicated he deserves no protection from the Secret Service. The specifics of the Harry situation are complicated and his channel's not going to adjudicate them. What is observable is that the president has made public statements about a member of the king's family that are, by any normal standard of diplomatic courtesy, unusual. A head of state visiting a country whose leader has publicly spoken in those terms about your son is not visiting on neutral personal ground. Next, the character question. This is a harder thing to say, and the channel says it carefully. The pattern of the president's conduct, documented extensively from the channel's previous videos, is a willingness to disrespect institutions and figures that most leaders treat as beyond personal attack. Trump attacked the Pope on Easter weekend. He posted himself as Jesus on Truth Social. He called a sitting pontiff, quotes, weak on crime. He reshared a second AI-generated image of Jesus hugging him 3 days later and described critics as, quotes, radical left lunatics. A king visiting this president is visiting someone who has demonstrated on the record that no office or institution is above a social media post if it becomes convenient. These are the difficulties. They are real. They deserve to be stated plainly, and having stated them, we can now make the case for going anyway. So next I'm going to speak about why the king should go, the case for his presence. The debate about whether the king should go contains an implicit assumption that needs to be examined. The assumption is that a state visit is an endorsement, that by going, the king signals approval of the person he is visiting. That assumption is historically and diplomatically mistaken. It is not how royal diplomacy has ever worked, and is not how this visit should be understood. So I'll talk next about what the Crown is for. The Crown's role in British foreign policy is distinct from the government's. The monarch does not set policy, but the monarchy can open doors, build personal relationships, and provide a form of engagement that a Prime Minister or a Foreign Secretary cannot. It carries different weight, it signals something different, and it gives the United Kingdom a diplomatic tool that most countries simply do not have. That tool has been deployed throughout the history of the modern monarchy in the service of British interests, not in the service of making the monarch personally comfortable. Queen Elizabeth II hosted Nicolae Ceausescu in 1978. She hosted him at Buckingham Palace, gave him full state visit treatment, and later described it as one of the most unpleasant experiences of her reign. Ceausescu was a dictator who had committed serious human rights abuses. She went ahead because British interests required engagement, and because the alternative, cancellation, would have produced consequences more harmful to Britain than the discomfort of the visit. She met Robert Mugabe. She met leaders of regimes whose values were entirely opposed to everything she personally stood for. She did it because the Crown is not a personal statement. It is an instrument of the national interest. And the national interest sometimes requires sitting across a table from people you would not choose to spend time with. Next, I'll talk about the cost of cancellation. What would cancelling the visit actually produce? It would produce a news cycle. It would produce a moment of satisfaction for those who feel strongly that Trump should never receive the honour of a state visit. And then it would produce consequences. The consequences would not be good ones. The United States remains the UK's largest single trading partner. The special relationship, whatever its current condition, is a diplomatic asset that Britain depends on across defence, intelligence and economic matters. Walking away from a state visit would be read in Washington as a deliberate snub. And this particular president, as his conduct towards the Pope demonstrates, does not respond to snubs with reflection. He responds with escalation. A cancelled visit would not improve the tariff situation, it would make it worse. It would not improve the trade relationship, it would make it worse. And it would hand the president a grievance to leverage indefinitely. A gift to a man who has shown he knows exactly how to use grievances. Churchill's formulation remains accurate. Jaw is better than war. The principle applies here. A conversation, however uncomfortable, is better than a rupture. A state visit, however awkward, is better than a diplomatic vacuum. The UK needs to be in the room. Walking out of the room is not strength. It is the appearance of strength that produces weakness. Next, I'll talk about the Trump-Pope parallel. This channel has documented in detail what the President did on Easter weekend 2026. The attacks on Pope Leo XIV, the Jesus images, the pattern of conduct towards one of the most significant religious figures. The Pope responded by continuing his work. He went to Algeria. He kept posting. He did not cancel anything. He said, quote, "I have no fear for the Trump administration," and he continued. There is a lesson in that response for King Charles. The Pope's authority was not diminished by the President's attacks. It was, if anything, enhanced, because the contrast between the two responses was visible to everybody watching. The Pope maintained dignity. The President deleted a post. The King's authority, like the Pope's, does not depend on the President's approval. It depends on the King's own conduct. And the King's conduct in Washington, measured, gracious, purposeful, will say more about Britain than any cancellation. Next, I'll talk about the timing argument. There is also a practical timing argument that deserves consideration. The difficulties in the UK-US relationship, the tariffs, the trade tensions, the broader geopolitical drift of this administration are not going to improve on their own. The trajectory of American foreign policy under this administration has been toward leverage, toward treating allies as competitors. That trajectory is not going to be altered by a British monarch refusing to visit. But it might, in some small and impossible to measure way, be slowed, or humanised, or given a personal dimension that creates space for the kind of back-channel engagement that state visits make possible. Don't get me wrong, the bad news is coming for Britain regardless. But the question is whether Britain faces that bad news having maintained the relationship or burnt it down. Maintaining the relationship does not mean accepting everything that comes with it. It means preserving the channels through which you can still push back. So next I'm going to talk about the art of the necessary, smiling with purpose. Let us be clear about what going to Washington means and what it does not mean. It does not mean that the king endorses the tariffs. It does not mean that he has now changed his view on climate change. It does not mean he approves of the way the Commonwealth has been treated, or the way the president has spoke about his son, or the way the president conducts himself on social media. None of those things are implied by a state visit. A state visit is a formal diplomatic engagement. Its purpose is relationship maintenance and national interest, not personal alignment. What going to Washington means is that Britain is a serious country that takes its alliances seriously, even when those alliances are under strain. It means that the United Kingdom understands the difference between a government's conduct and the long-term bilateral relationship with the United States, a relationship that will outlast this administration. It has outlasted every previous one. And that means that the king is doing his job, which is to serve British interests through the full range of tools available to him, including the one tool that is uniquely his. So next I'm going to talk about the European dimension. The broader strategic picture makes the visit even more important, not less. Britain's long-term trajectory, and this channel has argued this in the democracy video, is towards greater alignment with Europe, both economically and militarily. The post-Brexit recalibration is happening. European defence cooperation is expanding. The strategic logic of British dependence on American goodwill alone is increasingly fragile. But that realignment takes time. It takes negotiation. It takes political capital. In the meantime, Britain cannot afford to alienate the United States whilst simultaneously rebuilding its European relationships. It needs both. And maintaining the American relationship, even imperfect, even with a difficult counterpart, is the sensible short-term position while the longer-term strategic architecture is rebuilt. The visit to Washington does not contradict the pivot towards Europe. It buys time for it. Next, what the king cannot do. The king cannot change the president's tariff policy. He cannot change the president's view of the environment, or the Commonwealth, or Harry. Essentially, he cannot make the president a different person or alter the fundamental character of this administration. None of that is within his power, and it should not be presented as though it is. What the king can do is maintain the communication channel, keep the conversation going, be present at the table as a representative of a country that takes the relationship seriously, signal to the British public and to the world that Britain is not rattled, that it can engage with difficulty without being destabilised by it, and do it with a particular combination of graciousness and spine that good royal diplomacy is always required. The graciousness is the easy part. The king is very good at it. The spine is the harder part. It does not require a confrontation. It requires the king to conduct himself with such evident dignity and seriousness of purpose that the contrast with the person he is visiting is self-evident. He does not need to say anything critical. He just simply needs to be himself. And in that context, being himself is more than sufficient. So next I'm going to talk about the historical parallel. There is a template for this. When the Queen visited China in 1986, she did so as part of a relationship that included significant human rights concerns. When she visited Saudi Arabia, she wore a headscarf. When she sat across from Ceausescu, she smiled. She understood that the monarchy's influences depends on its presence, and that you can only shape a relationship you are in. Withdrawal is not a neutral act. It is a choice that forecloses options. And foreclosing options is rarely a smaller power's interest when dealing with a larger one. The king knows this history. He lived through much of it. His mother taught it. This is not an unfamiliar situation. It is, in essence, the situation the Crown has navigated repeatedly across its history. The names change. The character of the difficult person changes. The principle does not. Next, I'll present an honest conclusion. Go, and go with intention. The case for cancelling the state visit is emotionally understandable. The President has behaved in a number of documented instances in ways that are difficult to square with the normal courtesies of international relations. He has taxed an American Pope. He has treated close allies as economic adversaries. He has said things about members of the royal family that are, to put it charitably, unusual. He has spoken in disrespectful terms about UK military support for US-centred military operations. The impulse to say, we are not doing this, this is not the kind of person we expend these honours to, that impulse is human and it is comprehensible. But politics is not the realm in which the most emotionally comprehensible response is always the correct one. Politics is the realm in which you manage the gap between what you would like the world to be and what it actually is. And what the world actually is right now is a situation in which Britain needs the United States more than the United States needs Britain. And in which the asymmetry of power means that Britain cannot afford the luxury of a symbolic cancellation. Next, I'll talk about the real argument. Cancelling the visit would feel good for approximately one news cycle. Then the tariffs would still be there, trade tensions would still be there, the Commonwealth pressures would still be there, and there would be one additional problem. A president who had been publicly snubbed by the British monarchy, who had been handed a grievance, who had demonstrated comprehensively that he knows how to use grievances. Going to Washington does not resolve any of those problems either. Let's be honest about that. No state visit is going to fundamentally alter the trajectory of this administration's foreign policy. The King is not going to walk into the White House and walk out having changed the tariff rate. That is not what state visits do. What state visits do is maintain relationships, keep the channel open, preserve the space for conversation that makes subsequent engagement possible, and signal to Washington, to Brussels, to Beijing, to every capital watching that Britain is a country that plays the long game, that it is not rattled by the difficulty of the current moment, that it understands the difference between the person currently in the White House and the enduring importance of the relationship with the country he leads. So go, and go with intention. The King should go. He should go graciously, which he will. He should go with dignity, which of course he will. He should go having understood that this is not a personal visit, but a national one, representing millions of British people whose interests depend on the relationship being maintained. And he should go knowing that this conduct in Washington, the way he carries himself, the conversations he has privately, the impressions he leaves, is a form of British diplomacy that no Prime Minister can replicate. He should go knowing what generations of his family have known before him, that the Crown has sat across the table from very difficult people before, that it has smiled at the right moments, held its tongue at others, and served British interests in situations that were, frankly, more morally uncomfortable than this one. And it has done so not because the monarchy is indifferent to values. King Charles has demonstrated throughout his adult life that he is anything but indifferent to values, but because it understands that the way to preserve what matters is to remain in the room. The bad news for Britain is coming from Washington eventually. The question is not whether, but when and how bad, and how much room Britain has to manoeuvre when it arrives. A state visit does not prevent the bad news, but it might, just might, buy a little bit more time. And in diplomacy, time to manoeuvre is everything. Smile, Your Majesty, with all the intention in the world. So in conclusion, this channel has made videos about the American administration's conduct, the Signs and Wonders series, the Trump via the Pope series, the democracy and autocracy analysis. Those videos document serious concerns about the direction of American political power. This video reaches a different kind of conclusion. Not that the concerns are wrong, but that the response to them in the specific case of the British state visit is engagement rather than withdrawal. The two positions are not contradictory. You can hold serious concerns about a political figure and still believe that the correct response is to remain at the table. In fact, in this moment, that might be the exact combination Britain needs. Please like and subscribe if this gave you something to think about, and thank you.